Hi guys, tonight we're diving into the dark, dangerous, and often miserable world of medieval assassins. Forget what you've seen in movies, this job was anything but glamorous. From unreliable clients and crude weapons to deadly missions with no backup, being a killer for hire in the Middle Ages was a brutal way to survive. If you're into gritty history, served in a calm, relaxing tone, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below with which part of a medieval assassin's life you think was the worst, sleeping in alleys, risking torture, or being hunted by your own clients. Now dim, the lights get comfortable, and let's explore why this was one job you really didn't want. Let's be clear, no one in medieval Europe woke up dreaming of becoming an assassin. It wasn't a job you trained for. It wasn't passed down from father to son. And it definitely wasn't something you'd brag about at the local tavern. It was a last resort. A desperate act taken by people with no other path left open. Some were soldiers returning from war, wounded in body or mind, no longer fit for the battlefield, but too dangerous for peace. Others were orphans, street thieves, or political pawns molded into tools for someone else's purpose. You didn't become a medieval assassin because you wanted to. You became one because the world had already taken everything else, and the pay not great. Sure, there was silver involved if you were lucky. A small amount up front, just enough to buy time and prepare. The rest came afterward. Maybe. Clients weren't exactly known for being trustworthy, if they were the type to hire a killer in the first place. Chances are they weren't big on honor or loyalty. That meant the risk of being double-crossed was high. You could finish the job perfectly and still end up on the wrong end of a dagger because someone didn't want loose ends. Preparation was everything. There were no manuals, no secret guilds offering training. You learned by observing, by failing, by surviving. A successful assassin had to be their own scout, their own planner, and their own escape artist. It meant memorizing the target's schedule, when they prayed, when they ate, how long they spent in the gardens, which guards were loyal, which ones drank too much. It meant studying escape routes, not just one, but 2 or 3, just in case something went wrong. And something usually did. Weapons were simple. No silenced pistols or hidden blades here. Just a dagger, maybe a length of rope, a vial of poison if you could afford it. The dagger had to be short enough to conceal, sharp enough to kill with a single thrust, and quiet, because noise was your enemy. Poison was trickier. The ingredients were unreliable. Dosages were inconsistent. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it made your target vomit and scream, drawing attention you really didn't want. Assassins didn't walk through open gates. They climbed walls, squeezed through drainage tunnels, or posed as servants to get close. Disguises were common, but not foolproof. A stammer, a slip in dialect, or a nervous glance could give you away. And if they caught you, well, let's just say medieval justice wasn't kind. You wouldn't get a trial. You'd get a rack, or a fire, or a noose if they were in a generous mood. Even when the blade met its mark, the job wasn't over. You had to vanish. Fast. That meant diving into alleys, running across rooftops, or blending into a festival crowd. It meant outsmarting city guards and bounty hunters, all while the city locked down its gates and shouted your description from the rooftops. You had to be a ghost, and that ghost had no one. Friends were a liability. Family was a weakness. Love dangerous. Every connection you made was something someone else could use against you. So most assassins lived in the shadows, alone, isolated. Watching the world from a distance they could never cross. Their only constant companion was fear. Fear of betrayal. Fear of discovery. Fear of being outwitted by someone just a little smarter, or just a little faster. Imagine walking through a crowded street and knowing that at any moment someone might recognize you not as a neighbor or a customer, but as a killer. Then there was the superstition. Medieval Europe was a deeply religious, often paranoid place. People believed in curses, demons, and the evil eye. Assassins who killed quietly and vanished without a trace were often thought to be in league with the devil. Some said they used magic. Others claimed they drank blood or made pacts with dark forces. Even if none of it was true, the rumors alone were enough to turn a crowd into a mob. And if you somehow survived all of that, if you managed to take out your target, escape unnoticed, and actually get paid, you still weren't safe. Because the client who hired you, they knew what you'd done. They knew you could be traced back to them. So maybe they paid you. Or maybe they had someone waiting outside with a crossbow. Trust was a luxury assassins couldn't afford. They say some assassins kept journals hidden in floorboards or tucked beneath loose stones, not for legacy, just as a way to talk to someone, anyone, without speaking. Most never made it to old age. The work caught up with them. A misstep, a smarter guard, a client with second thoughts. The ending was always the same, but despite everything, the job never disappeared. There was always someone willing to kill and someone desperate enough to pay. And so the cycle continued, quietly, out of sight, beneath the polished surface of history. That's why you won't find many names. No statues, no tombstones. Assassins left no legacy, only whispers. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, think of those shadows behind the castle walls, the hurried steps in dark corridors, the figure no one noticed until it was too late, the assassin who never asked for glory. Only coin, only silence, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to live one more day. So now we know who these assassins were: loners, survivors. People forced into the shadows by circumstance, not choice. But what did they actually use to carry out their grim works? The answer is whatever they could get their hands on. Let's start with the most obvious tool, a blade. There were no spring-loaded wrist daggers or elegant curved knives forged by master smiths. Most assassins carried something simple, often homemade or stolen. A dagger small enough to hide in the sleeve or boot. It didn't need to look pretty. It just needed to be sharp. A tool for one purpose: in and out. Fast. Quiet. Clean if they were lucky. But clean wasn't always an option. Steel wasn't cheap, and blacksmiths didn't exactly offer assassin specials. So many killers for hire made do with rusty blades, worn down edges, or broken swords repurposed into stabbing tools. A dull knife meant more effort. More effort meant more sound. More sound meant more risk. Every second longer that blade was in the body was another second closer to being caught. Then there was poison. This one sounds dramatic: coated blades, goblets laced with venom, maybe a puff of powder in a candle flame. In reality, it was trial and error. Mostly error. Poisons were hard to come by. Apothecaries didn't advertise deadly tinctures on their shelves. You had to know someone. And even then, the recipes were shaky. Hemlock, arsenic, belladonna, yes, they were all used. But dosages were vague, potency varied, and some took hours to work. Others didn't work at all. Imagine slipping poison into someone's drink only to watch them stumble a little. And keep talking. Keep breathing. Keep looking around the room, trying to figure out who just tried to kill them. Now your cover's blown. No second chances. No elegant escape. Some assassins experimented with powders, ground glass, crushed minerals, even fermented animal parts. They hid them in food, in wine, in perfume. Sometimes it worked. More often, it just made the target sick and suspicious. From that moment forward, the target might travel with food tasters, or eat nothing that wasn't sealed, or refuse to be alone. A failed poisoning didn't just waste your time. It made every future attempt exponentially harder. Ropes were another common tool. For strangling, for climbing, for escape. But ropes like blades were imperfect. A rough cord could cut your hands open mid-climb. A weak one could snap under your weight. And strangulation. That wasn't like the plays make it look. It wasn't instant. It was messy. It was loud. And unless you caught your target completely unaware, it was risky. A shout, a struggle, a dropped candle. Anything could blow the whole mission wide open. Still, the rope had one major advantage. It was quiet. No metal glinting in torchlight. No clatter if dropped. Just fibers and knots and the strength in your arms. Beyond these basics, there were distractions. Smoke, if you could make it. Bells, if you needed chaos. Throwing sand or coins to draw attention elsewhere. Dogs were a constant enemy, so some assassins carried scraps of meat soaked in sleep drafts. Not exactly high-tech, but effective, if the dosage was right. If not, you might just have one angry, half-conscious dog barking your location to every guard in a mile radius. And let's talk about disguises. A disguise wasn't just a costume. It was a character. You couldn't just throw on a monk's robe and hope for the best. You had to walk like a monk, speak like one, know what they ate, how they prayed, what prayers they mumbled under their breath. You had to be so convincing that not even the real monks noticed something was off. Because if they did, all it took was one whispered word stranger to turn suspicion into pursuit. Clothing, of course, came with problems of its own. Loose robes could trip you. Armor might clank. Shoes made for fashion or status often slipped in mud or echoed on stone floors. Everything had to be considered. Every sound you made. Every movement. You weren't just hiding. You were performing. And the audience wasn't kind. Let's not forget fire. It was a tool for fear, for covering tracks, for starting a panic. But fire was dangerous, unpredictable. It could just as easily kill the wrong person or trap you in the blaze. Still, some assassins took the risk. A small flame lit in the right place at the right time could draw guards away, or start a riot, or burn down a safe house to destroy evidence. Fire was a last resort, a reckless gamble. But sometimes it was all you had left. Every tool, every trick came with a price. Noise, risk, time. The longer an assassin stayed in one place, the more exposed they became. That's why the best tools weren't weapons at all. They were awareness, stillness, nerve. You had to feel every floorboard before stepping. Notice every shadow, every flicker of candlelight. Learn to read faces. Know when someone was bluffing, or when they were reaching for a sword. Your best tool was the quiet voice in your head that said, "Go now," and you listened. Because not listening meant death. Even the environment could be a tool or a trap. Rain muffled footsteps but made surfaces slippery. Snow covered your tracks going in but showed every step on the way out. Darkness could be a friend, but only if you could navigate without a torch. And if you needed to hide in water, you'd better be able to hold your breath longer than most people can count. All of this for one job, one kill. One pouch of silver that might not even be there when you were done. And still, they did it. Over and over. Because that's what survival looked like for some people. Brutal. Silent. And always, always temporary. These were not heroes. Not saints. Not villains in the traditional sense either. Just people who knew how to wait, how to strike, and how to disappear. So we've talked about the assassin, the outcast, with nothing to lose. And we've explored the crude, unreliable tools they carried. But those tools were only half the battle. The other half, the target. And targets in medieval Europe weren't easy. Assassins didn't go after commoners or wandering merchants. There was no point. They were hired for the high-value jobs, nobles, bishops, wealthy merchants, political rivals. People with status influence, and most importantly, protection. These weren't solitary figures walking dark alleys. They lived behind stone walls, guarded day and night by men trained to spot threats. Every step toward them was a step deeper into danger. Let's start with the setting. Castles, fortified estates, monasteries turned into mini fortresses. Getting into one of these places was a puzzle in itself. Thick gates, guard towers, iron portcullises that dropped with terrifying speed, moats filled with stagnant water, or worse, freezing mud. You couldn't just walk through the front door. You had to observe. Find the back entrance, the servant's path, the chimney no one used anymore. And even if you got inside, that was just the beginning. These structures were designed to confuse outsiders. Narrow corridors, sudden staircases, rooms that seemed to change function from one season to the next. If the assassin didn't know the layout in advance, they could end up lost, wandering through stone halls with nowhere to hide and nowhere to run. The people inside weren't much easier. Let's take a nobleman, for example. Someone influential, maybe a warlord, maybe a landholder with ties to the king. He wouldn't dine alone. He wouldn't sleep alone. He wouldn't even walk alone. Guards flanked him both day and night. And not just any guards, loyal men. Sometimes family, often brutal. These were men who could smell fear, who'd fought in battles and knew what a drawn breath before an attack sounded like. You couldn't just approach and hope for a clean strike. You had to wait. For the moment, the guard stepped out. For the second the candlelight flickered and shadows deepened. For the split second of carelessness that might never come, timing was everything. And then there was the target himself. Not all of them were weak. Not all of them were unaware. Many had survived rebellions, betrayals, even wars. They were hardened, paranoid, sleeping with a dagger under their pillow, eating only after a servant tasted the food, sitting with their backs to the wall so no one could sneak up behind them. Every movement, every glance filled with suspicion. You didn't get close unless you earned their trust or found a moment when no trust was needed. Assassins watched for routines. Everyone had them, even nobles. The evening walk, the morning prayer, the time between meals when they dismissed their retinue and read alone. It could take days, sometimes weeks, just to find a single moment of vulnerability. But vulnerability didn't mean safety. There was always risk. Let's say the assassin finds a gap, a lone hallway, a moment of prayer, a guard distracted. They move in. The blade is ready. But then something shifts. The noble turns. A door opens unexpectedly. A hound starts barking 3 rooms away. That's all it takes. The element of surprise vanishes, and with it, the slim chance of escape. Because once the alarm sounded, the entire building would come alive. Bells ringing, boots pounding stone, torches flooding halls with light. And every hand, every eye, every sword would be searching for one thing: the intruder. Sometimes the assassin didn't even make it to the target. Sometimes the plan fell apart before the first step. A wrong word in the tavern, a bribe too obvious, a servant who looked a second too long at the new face in the kitchen. Fear traveled fast in medieval courts. If rumors of a plot spread, even vague ones, everything locked down. Guards doubled, doors barred, food sealed. No one in, no one out. For assassins, information was power, and silence was gold. The most successful killers didn't boast. They didn't gloat. They didn't leave messages or symbols or anything theatrical. They came in unnoticed and left the same way. The only clue something had happened was the body. And even that might be hidden if the job was truly clean. But those were rare cases. More often, it ended in blood. Not just the targets, but the assassins too. Sometimes they got caught mid-strike. Sometimes they were ambushed after the kill. Other times, they escaped the castle only to be hunted down in the forest days later by angry men with dogs and torches. And all for what? A pouch of silver. A promise made by someone with more enemies than friends. Yet even knowing the risks, the assassins came. Because power always has enemies. And in a world where politics was written in blood, a single dagger in the right back could change the future of a kingdom. It wasn't just personal. It was political. Some assassins were hired not by desperate lovers or jealous rivals, but by entire factions. Secret councils, rebellious nobles, foreign powers. Killing one man could weaken a whole alliance or trigger a war or open the door to a new ruler. But even these bigger missions came with the same problem: the target was never truly alone, never truly vulnerable. And the more important they were, the more layers of protection wrapped around them like armor. Getting close required planning, patience, a willingness to wait for days in a cellar, to sleep in straw beside pigs, to pose as a beggar, a washerwoman, a blind man. Anything to stay unnoticed. Anything to survive long enough to strike. And sometimes, even after all that effort, the job failed. The blade missed. The poison wasn't strong enough. The guard returned too early. And then, everything unraveled. But even failure had a use. Because every attempt, successful or not, sent a message. You are not untouchable. That was the assassin's real weapon. Not the blade, not the poison, but fear. The fear that no matter how high your tower, how thick your gate, how loyal your guards, you could still be reached. You could still be watched. You could still be ended. And in the medieval world, that kind of fear had power all its own. So, the blade has struck. The deed is done. The nobleman collapses in silence, or not so silently, depending on your luck. The guards are seconds from noticing, and your fingers are still wet with blood. What now? This is the part most people forget about the escape. Killing was only half the job, maybe even less than half, because once the target fell, the real nightmare began. You see, every fortress, every estate, every medieval city was built like a trap. Only it wasn't made for you to spring it. It was made to hold you in. The moment the body is discovered, or even suspected, the entire place comes alive. Guards shout. Bells ring. Horns sound. Doors slam shut. Orders are barked in languages you don't speak. What was once a silent hallway becomes a thunderous echo chamber of metal boots and drawn swords. Every corridor is a gauntlet. Every face is an enemy. And you standing there with blood on your hands have to vanish. Now, there was no escape plan handed to you. No hidden rope dangling from a window. You had to plan it yourself before the job. Days, sometimes weeks in advance. You had to map every route out of the building, every window, tunnel, gate, or cellar. You had to notice things no one else thought about: the kitchen chimney wide enough to crawl through, the back gate with a loose latch, the roof tiles that didn't creak when stepped on. But even with a perfect plan, things could go wrong. Maybe your exit is blocked. A door locked you thought would be open. A hallway now crawling with guards. Maybe the storm you were counting on to mask your footsteps never came, and now your escape is lit by a full moon and dead silence. Improvisation wasn't optional, it was survival. Some assassins hid. Not forever, just long enough. Behind tapestries, in coal bins, under stairwells, waiting for the initial chaos to fade for the guards to move on to a different floor or give up the immediate chase. It took nerves of steel to stay still, to hold your breath while footsteps passed inches away. Others fled immediately, bursting out windows or scaling walls while the shouts were still building. But that was louder, riskier, and often meant abandoning any hope of subtlety. Once you chose to run, you had to run like hell. Let's say you make it out of the keep, out of the walls, into the city or countryside beyond. You're not safe. In fact, you might be in even greater danger now. Cities, especially important ones, closed their gates at night. If you weren't already outside before the kill, you were likely trapped inside. Guards roamed the streets. Torches illuminated every alley. And townspeople scared of thieves and murderers weren't likely to shelter someone covered in sweat and blood, no matter how desperate your eyes. So, what did you do? You used the crowd if there was one. Maybe a festival, a market, a fire that could be set as a distraction, anything to create noise and confusion. An assassin who blended in with frightened citizens could melt away in the chaos while the guards chased shadows in every direction. But if it was a quiet night, no crowd, no smoke, no music. Then it came down to luck and planning. You moved like you belonged. You wore plain clothes. You didn't run unless you had to. A calm man gets less attention than a frantic one. Sometimes assassins use the city's own underworld smugglers, beggars, thieves. People who knew which grates led to tunnels, which warehouses had back exits, which brothels had secret stairwells that bypass the main floor. But this was dangerous. You had to trust people at least for a few hours. And trust, as we've already seen, was not a luxury you could afford. Out in the countryside, new problems arose. If the kill happened in a rural estate, you might find yourself running through woods across fields chased by horses and dogs. Bloodhounds especially were feared. They could follow a scent for miles. If you didn't mask your trail mud garlic, sometimes animal dung, you'd be caught within hours. Assassins traveled light. No armor. No bags. Just what they could carry in a pouch or under their cloak. Speed was their only ally, and when distance wasn't enough disguise, became their shield. Many had spare clothes hidden outside the site, stuffed under rocks, or buried in a dry patch of earth. After the kill, they'd swap identities. A killer becomes a traveling minstrel. A fleeing shadow becomes a harmless pilgrim. The blood gets washed in a stream. The weapon tossed into a river. But even this wasn't foolproof. Word traveled fast in the medieval world, especially when murder was involved. Town criers, church bells, messengers on horseback. Within a day, your face, or at least your description, might be known across the region. A limp, a scar, a color of hair. Enough to mark you. Enough to end you. Because once the alarm was raised, everyone wanted a piece of the reward. Bounty hunters, local sheriffs, angry peasants, even other assassins. You were no longer the hunter, you were the hunted. And the roads you used yesterday to arrive became the traps waiting to spring on your way out. Some assassins fled to foreign lands, different kingdoms, places with no extradition and less interest in past crimes. But that required contacts, money, and, again, luck. Others changed names, started new lives, moved from city to city, working as laborers or priests or guards, always looking over their shoulders. The ghost of the job followed them, even if no one else did. And then there were the few who didn't run at all. They stayed. They hid in plain sight. Lived in the very city they'd spilled blood in. They counted on fear, on silence, on the fact that people were so scared of what they'd done, no one dared speak their name aloud. A reputation in some cases was a stronger cloak than any disguise, but for most, the escape was a fading memory. A blur of darkness, breath-pounding feet and racing hearts. A blur that either led to freedom or a shallow grave somewhere along the road. Because in the end, no matter how perfect the strike was, no matter how skilled the assassin, the job wasn't over until you disappeared. Truly disappeared. And not everyone was that lucky. You've survived the strike, escaped the fortress, dodged the guards, lost the dogs, maybe even changed your name. You're alive. That should be the end of the story, but it's not. Because now comes the final piece of the puzzle, the one most assassins dreaded more than the kill itself, facing the client. The one who hired you. See, when you're the kind of person who pays someone else to do your killing, trust isn't exactly your strongest trait. And from the assassin's point of view, that went both ways. Let's rewind a little. Before the blade, before the plan, before the poison, there was always someone with a request. A whisper in a tavern. A letter slid across a table, a pouch of silver, and a name. The client. They could be anyone. A jealous noble, a rival merchant, a priest with secrets. Sometimes it was personal revenge for a brother, justice for a wronged daughter, or hatred buried for years. Other times it was business. A threat removed, a competitor silenced, a future reshaped. But no matter the motive, the danger was the same. Because once the job was done, the client held all the cards, and you held nothing but risk. Think about it. You've just killed someone important. A bishop, a duke, maybe even a royal cousin. And who knows you did it? One person, the one who paid you. They know the time, the method. They might even know your real name. Which means if they get caught, or get scared, or just change their mind, you're the first loose end to be tied up. Some clients paid in full, quickly, no questions asked. They understood the value of silence. They wanted it done, and then they wanted it gone. But others weren't so reliable. There were excuses. The coin hasn't arrived yet. I'll pay after I confirm it's finished. Just wait one more day. All the while, the assassin grew more exposed. Every hour without payment was an hour closer to betrayal. And betrayal was common. Sometimes the client vanished, changed towns, burned the letters, denied everything, left the assassin holding a blade and no silver. Worse, some clients turned the assassin in, claiming they'd uncovered the plot themselves. A neat little twist, the killer becomes the scapegoat, and the real mastermind walks away clean. Other times, the assassin never made it to the meeting at all. Instead, a few guards showed up in their place, or a knife in the dark, or poisoned wine. After all, dead men don't ask for payment. That's why seasoned assassins rarely returned to the same client twice. They moved constantly, changed their methods, left no trail. If possible, they avoided face-to-face meetings altogether. Some used intermediaries, brokers, who passed messages, arranged the terms, handled the money. It was safer. But it also meant trusting yet another layer of people. And in this line of work, trust was still a dangerous luxury. Of course, not every client was a snake. There were those who followed through, who paid fairly, who understood the gravity of what they'd done and wanted nothing more than to put it behind them. These people often disappeared themselves, fading into obscurity, to avoid any link to the crime. And then there were the powerful ones. The ones who couldn't disappear because they were the ones in charge. These were kings, dukes, cardinals. They hired assassins not for personal revenge, but for strategy. To eliminate rivals, crush uprisings, influence succession. But these clients were the most dangerous of all, because to them you weren't a partner. You were a tool, and tools are disposable. They'd reward you with a heavy purse and a handshake one day, and have your throat slit the next. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because you knew too much. In fact, the most careful clients didn't just hire one assassin. They hired two. One to do the killing, the other to follow the first and make sure no witnesses remained. It was brutal, efficient, cold, and it worked. That's why many assassins never truly trusted their clients, even after the job, even after the payment, especially after the payment. Some demanded the full amount up front. Dangerous but safer in the long run. Others insisted on meeting only in neutral territory, a church, a public square, a merchant's guild. Places where betrayal would be harder to pull off without drawing attention. And some simply vanished after the kill, never speaking to the client again. Their silence was the receipt. But this dance between assassin and client was more than just about money or secrecy. It was about power. Because the truth is, the moment the assassin completed their mission, they held power over the one who hired them. Leverage. One word from the killer could expose everything. A detail here, a letter there. The entire plot unraveled. So clients lived in fear too. Fear of what the assassin might say, might do, might want later. And assassins, they knew this. Some used it. Subtly. A suggestion. A look. A quiet reminder we're both in this now. Others stayed quiet, knowing that pushing too hard only increased their odds of being erased. It was a relationship built on mutual paranoia. And like all such relationships, it never lasted. Eventually, the assassin would take another job, in another town, from another client. And maybe this one would pay, maybe not. Maybe they'd send wine and coin. Maybe they'd send a blade in the night. Either way, the cycle continued. Because for every noble who needed someone gone, there was someone desperate enough to make it happen. And for every assassin who survived, there were 3 who didn't. Still, they kept coming back. Not because they trusted the client, but because in a world full of betrayal and blood, the only thing more dangerous than doing the job was not doing it. You've done the job, escaped the fortress, avoided betrayal this time. Maybe you even got paid. But the silver doesn't shine as brightly as you thought it would. Not when you're lying awake at night, listening to every creak in the floorboards. Not when you start to notice how people look at you. Not when the world begins to feel quieter. Because what no one ever tells you is that the real cost of being an assassin isn't just the risk or the violence. It's the silence. The kind that slowly eats away at you. You couldn't tell anyone what you did. Not your family if you still had one. Not a friend or lover or priest. Confession didn't come with absolution when blood was spilled for coin. Secrets were your only shield. But they were also a cage. Let's talk about relationships, what little of them could exist. Some assassins tried to keep normal lives. A small home in a quiet village. A spouse who thought they were a traveler, a trader, a craftsman, maybe even a child. But the lie hung over everything. Every day they lived on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one slip of memory, and the illusion would crack. Others didn't even try. They stayed on the move, changed names, slept in stables or cellars or nowhere at all. They spoke only when they had to, ate alone, traveled alone, trusted no one. It was safer that way. But safe didn't mean easy. Humans weren't meant for that kind of solitude. The mind, when left without company, starts talking to itself, replaying moments, rehearsing conversations that never happened, regretting choices that can't be undone. For an assassin, silence wasn't peace. It was noise without sound. The kind that grew louder with time. And then came the paranoia. Even if the job was clean, even if the client paid and disappeared, the fear remained. Because what if someone saw a servant in the hallway? A stable boy who recognized your face? A guard who kept quiet at the time but talked later? You never really knew, so you watched everyone. You studied expressions, noted patterns. who looked at you too long, who seemed to follow you from one market stall to the next, who sat one bench too close in the chapel. You learned to sleep lightly with a blade under the blanket and your back to the wall. Every knock at the door, every unexpected voice made your pulse spike. It wasn't just fear of discovery. It was fear of betrayal again. Because even if you trusted someone once, that didn't mean you could trust them now. Circumstances changed. People changed. Maybe they needed money. Maybe they wanted to cleanse their conscience. Maybe they were just scared. All it took was one person whispering your name in the wrong ear, and the gallows would be waiting. So you stayed quiet. You trained your face into stillness, your voice into neutrality. You learned to lie without blinking. And eventually, you stopped sharing anything real at all, not just about the job, but about yourself. And that's when something in you started to slip. Because when you keep so much locked inside for so long, you start to forget who you were before it all began. The boy who laughed at the harvest fair. The woman who sang when no one was listening. The part of you that wasn't just a weapon. You forget your own name. Some assassins wrote journals, not to brag, not to relive the kills, but to remember who they used to be, to hold on to something that felt true. Others carved small marks into wood or stone, one for each job, not out of pride, but out of need. Proof that they existed, that they weren't just shadows slipping through other people's stories. And what about remorse? That depended on the assassin. Some believed what they did was necessary, that the people they killed deserved it. Tyrants, betrayers, monsters in human form. And maybe some of them were, but others were just in the way. A rival, a voice of dissent, a symbol, not a villain. Those deaths didn't sit as easily. No matter how quiet the kill, there was always an echo. A child left fatherless. A wife who waited for someone who'd never return. A servant who found the body first and couldn't sleep for weeks afterward. Even if you never saw the grief, you knew it was out there floating somewhere just beyond your reach. You couldn't dwell on it. Not if you wanted to keep going. But some did. And when they did, the silence turned heavy, like a weight strapped to your chest. You carried it from one job to the next, from one town to the next, until eventually the silence started to sound like judgment. And yet, walking away wasn't simple either. What else could you do? What work welcomed someone with your particular talents? You couldn't exactly become a blacksmith or schoolteacher. You couldn't settle into farm life and hope no one ever recognized you. The blood on your hands wasn't just metaphor. It was real. Stained deep. You felt it even when it wasn't there. Some tried to retire, disappear into the mountains, live as hermits. But they rarely lasted long. Word got out. A rumor here, a name there. People came looking. Sometimes it was a new client. Sometimes a bounty hunter. Sometimes a relative of someone you'd taken away. Others just faded. Drank too much. Picked fights they couldn't win. Took one last job they knew they wouldn't come back from. Some called it fate. Others called it justice. But really, it was just the end of a story no one wanted to tell out loud. Because no ballads were sung for assassins. No elegies written. No gravestones carved with kind words. Only silence. The same silence they carried their whole lives. The same silence they left behind. By now, you've survived the kill, escaped the chase, sidestepped betrayal, and endured the crushing weight of silence. You've disappeared into the cracks of the world, learned to live without trust, and watched your own reflection become unfamiliar. But something else follows you. Always. Your reputation. Because even if you spoke to no one, even if you never uttered a word about what you'd done, whispers traveled faster than you ever could. That's how it worked in the medieval world. Truth didn't need proof. It needed tone. It needed someone to lower their voice just enough to make you lean in. And assassins, they were made of whispers. People didn't always know your face, but they knew your type. The man who never stayed in one town for too long. The woman who sat with her back to the wall. The quiet traveler who arrived alone and left before sunrise. You could change your name, your clothes, your story. But suspicion had a smell. And once someone caught the scent, it spread. They said assassins moved like cats, silent, sure-footed, watching everything. They said they never smiled, that their eyes were too still, that they asked strange questions. When do the guards change shifts? Which stairwell is used the least? Does the merchant always dine alone? Just curious, you'd say. But people remembered. And when someone important turned up dead, that curiosity became confirmation, even if you had nothing to do with it. That was the double edge of reputation. It could make you dangerous, but it could also make you a target. Let's say you built a name for yourself. Quietly, of course, just among those who mattered. The ones with power, the ones with money. They spoke of you not in public, but in locked rooms over goblets of wine and candlelight. The one who handled that affair in Ghent. The one who got past 3 guards and left no trace. You became a ghost story for the elite, a solution to certain inconvenient problems. But with every job, with every whispered reference, your profile grew. And when people start to believe you can't be stopped, they also start to ask, what if you turn on us? That's when the fear begins. Not from peasants or tavern folk, they might cross themselves and walk the other way, but they posed no threat. The real danger came from the ones who hired you. The ones who once toasted your name behind closed doors. Because now, they worry. They worry that you know too much, that you've seen too many secrets, that you've been in too many rooms you shouldn't have been in. And the longer you live, the more powerful your silence becomes. So they talk, they plot. Some even put prices on your head. Suddenly, your reputation, which once earned you work, becomes the very reason others want you gone. It's ironic, really. You spend your life trying to stay invisible, and then you become unforgettable. Of course, reputation wasn't always a curse. Sometimes it was the only thing that kept you alive. Walk into a town where no one knows your name, and you're just another suspect when the Lord's son ends up poisoned. But walk into a town where your name is feared, truly feared, and people leave you alone. They lower their eyes. They clear a space at the bar. They make sure you're not disturbed. It wasn't respect. Not really. It was survival in reverse. Keep the killer happy, and maybe they won't add you to their list. Some assassins played into this. They leaned into the myth, wore darker cloaks, sharpened their blades in full view, stayed silent even when they had something worth saying, because mystery was power. And fear. Fear kept you breathing. Others hated it. They just wanted to do the job and disappear. But when even the kids in the street pretend to stab each other and say your name, anonymity becomes impossible. Then come the imitators. Desperate young men who've heard the stories and think it's a life worth chasing. They follow your trail. Try to contact your contacts. Some even claim your name as their own, trying to ride your shadow like a ladder. That's dangerous too, because when one of them gets caught, they scream your name to save their own skin. Now people think you were involved in something you've never even heard of. A botched kill, a fire in the city square, a noblewoman's disappearance. And suddenly, guards you've never met are looking for you. Towns you've never visited put your name on wanted posters. The line between fact and legend blurs. You see, in the medieval world, memory wasn't kept in books. It lived in the mouths of storytellers. And once your story took root, it changed. It twisted. The man who strangled a traitorous bishop becomes the one who drinks blood and vanishes through walls. The woman who slipped past guards to poison a baron becomes a spirit, a curse whispered at bedtime. You become folklore, and folklore doesn't get to retire. Folklore doesn't get to fade away into a quiet life. It follows you, grows beyond you, and eventually replaces you. Because the day will come maybe sooner than you expect when someone else takes your place. A younger assassin, a bolder one, or maybe just someone with nothing left to lose. And they won't just do the job, they'll claim your name, your myth, your shadow. And just like that, you're gone. Still alive, maybe. Still watching from the corners of the world. But forgotten. Or worse, misremembered. The real you, what's left of it, buried under layers of legend. But for a time, your name meant something. It opened doors and closed others. It brought fear. It brought coin. And it kept you alive when your tools, your skills, and your luck had all run dry. That was your reputation. A shadow that always walked a few steps ahead, and sometimes whispered louder than you ever dared. So your name travels ahead of you, a ghost of reputation whispering into rooms you haven't entered yet. Sometimes that fear keeps you alive. Sometimes it earns you coin. But over time, it does something else too. It isolates you in a different way. Because once people start to fear you, not just suspect, not just whisper, but truly fear you, everything changes. Every glance is cautious. Every conversation shorter than it needs to be. No one challenges you, but no one really sees you either. You become a shadow in plain sight. At first, it might seem like power, like control. The bartender doesn't ask you to pay up front. The guards pretend not to notice your knife. A noble at a banquet avoids meeting your eyes. It's satisfying. A kind of invisible crown. Respect with no title. But then, the cracks begin to show. You try to buy bread in a village market, and the baker's hands shake as he wraps it. A child stares at you wide-eyed and silent, then runs to hide behind her mother's skirt. A tavern full of laughter goes quiet the moment you walk in. No one wants to sit near you, or speak to you, or be seen with you, because fear is contagious. People start to wonder if helping you makes them guilty by association, if standing next to you puts them in danger, if smiling at you means they'll be found hanging in the square come morning. You may not be hunted that day, but you're no longer welcome anywhere. And that kind of exile, it's a slow, strange death. The world starts to narrow. You avoid towns entirely. You travel at night. You sleep further off the road, further from the sound of human voices. You begin to forget the warmth of a shared fire, the sound of laughter not laced with caution, the way it felt to be part of something that didn't require lies. You stop speaking unless absolutely necessary, because your voice, once a tool of persuasion or deception, feels foreign now. Like a blade, you no longer trust yourself to wield gently. Eventually, you stop looking people in the eye, because too often what you see there is fear. And here's the dangerous part. When you live in that space long enough, when you've been feared for years, you start to see threats everywhere too. Not just in taverns or alleyways, but in kind gestures, in familiar faces. A smile becomes suspicious. A gift feels like a trap. An old friend showing up in a new city. You wonder who sent them. Why now? What they want. You trust no one, because no one trusts you. You begin to expect betrayal, to prepare for it. You rehearse fights in your head that may never happen. Plan exits from places you haven't even entered. You sit with your back to the wall out of habit, but also because the idea of someone standing behind you feels unbearable now. You become a master at anticipating danger, and sometimes you find it where it doesn't exist. There's a term for this: a sickness of the mind that soldiers bring back from war. But assassins weren't soldiers. There were no banners, no medals, no end dates. Just a long, slow erosion of what it meant to feel safe. You might think this level of caution would make you invincible. It doesn't. It makes you tired. Every person becomes a calculation. Every place a puzzle of exits and threats. Every conversation a trap to be disarmed. And when your whole life becomes defense, there's no room left for living. Eventually, you start avoiding not just people but decisions, opportunities, risk of any kind. You say no to a job that sounds too complicated, too noisy. You skip cities that are too crowded, too curious. You turn down a contact who reminds you too much of someone from the past. You start playing it safe. Safer. Always safer. And just like that fear, your own fear becomes your prison. But you don't see it that way. Not at first. You think you're being careful, smart, strategic. Until one day, you realize you haven't spoken more than 10 words to another person in over a week. You haven't looked up at the stars. Haven't eaten something warm. Haven't let your shoulders drop from that constant coiled readiness. You realize you're hiding from a world you once moved through like smoke. And for what? Silver gone. Power faded. Respect no. Only rumors remain. You became feared. But in doing so, you became alone. Utterly, completely alone. And the more feared you are, the more alone you stay. Because there's no coming back from a life like this. You can't unmake a reputation. You can't untell the stories. You can't return to innocence or peace or the comfort of a shared table. Not when the world sees you as a blade in human form. Some assassins broke under that weight. Quietly. Without fanfare. They stopped taking jobs. Stopped running. Stopped trying. They drank until they forgot who they were. Or vanished into some frozen wilderness where even fear couldn't follow. Others doubled down, leaning into the legend, becoming colder, sharper, turning that fear into a weapon, a kind of armor. But armor's heavy, and it doesn't just keep things out. It keeps you in. And then there were the rare few who tried to pass it on, took on an apprentice, a younger version of themselves, taught them everything, maybe hoping they'd do better, or at least not die alone. But that never really worked. Because fear isn't something you can hand down. It's something people choose to give you. Or not. And the next time someone walks into a room and the crowd goes silent, it won't be because of your name anymore. It'll be because of theirs. You've become a ghost in your own life. You walk through villages unnoticed, avoided. Your name is a whisper, your presence a warning. And over time, the silence, the suspicion, the fear, it all starts to settle into your bones. That's where the real price is paid. Because for all the stories people told about your knives, your poisons, your kills, no one ever talked about what it did to the body. Not just the bruises and cuts, but the slow wear, the parts of you that broke quietly, one night at a time. Let's start with sleep. It's the first thing to go. In the early days, it's just caution. You rest with one eye open. You lie still in doorways and barns and forgotten corners, waiting for a sound, a flicker of light. You train yourself to wake at the creak of a floorboard or the clink of metal. You tell yourself it's survival. But years pass and it stops being a choice. Your body forgets how to rest. Even in safety, if such a thing still exists, you can't relax. Your mind runs through escape routes. Your hand grips an invisible dagger. Your ears listen for footsteps that never come. You wake with clenched teeth and shallow breath. Or worse, you don't wake at all because you never really fell asleep. And sleep, when it does come, brings dreams. You don't get to choose them. Sometimes it's a face someone you killed, someone you couldn't. Sometimes it's a scream you heard once and can't forget. Sometimes it's silence so thick you wake choking on it. Then there's your body. Assassins aren't armored knights. You don't walk around wrapped in steel protected by banners and titles. You wear what lets you move fast, climb easily, vanish quickly. And that means you take damage. A lot of it. Your knees start to ache from crouching too long in the dark. Your hands stiffen from cold nights spent gripping ropes or daggers or wet stones. Your shoulders carry the tension of always being ready to strike or to run. You've jumped from too many windows, fallen from too many walls, been knocked down more times than you'll admit. You carry the scars, not dramatic ones necessarily. No sweeping slash across the eye. No cinematic knife wound across the chest. No, these are the small scars. The ones on your knuckles from climbing brick. The ones on your back from a rooftop landing gone wrong. The places where a blade grazed you, or a nail tore skin, or a belt buckle cracked a rib. You patch yourself up, stitch what you can, bind what you can't, and then you move on. But the damage stays. It shows up in stiffness, in pain, in the way you groan when getting up in the morning, though you're still far too young to be groaning like that. It's in the limp that only appears when no one's looking, the way you favor one shoulder, the wince when the weather changes. It's in the breath that won't quite come back after a chase, the chill that sinks deeper now than it used to, the old wound that still flares up when it rains. And here's what's cruel: no one sees it, because to the world you're still sharp, still deadly, still the ghost with the silent feet and the quick hands. No one sees you when you're alone, when your hands shake trying to light a fire, when you press your back against a tree and wonder how many more jobs your knees can take, when you forget what it felt like to move without pain. And if someone did see, would they care? Probably not, because the world doesn't remember you as a person. It remembers what you've done, the names you've erased, the power you've shifted, the fear you've sewn into the seams of history. But your body remembers everything. Every time you starved to avoid suspicion. Every time you held your breath in a cellar for minutes that felt like hours. Every time you ran until your lungs burned and your legs nearly gave out. Every time you fought on instinct, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. And the worst part, you can't undo any of it. There's no healer who can mend the kind of wear you carry. No tonic that can cure the grind of 1,000 narrow escapes. No soft bed that can erase the years your muscles spent clenched with fear. Some assassins tried. They saved their coin, bought land, built a quiet life far from the cities, far from the memories. But the damage was already done. They still woke at odd hours, still checked windows without thinking, still sat with their backs to the wall even when no one else was around. And the body-old friend that it was continued to ache in familiar places, because the truth is, a body doesn't forget. You can leave the job behind, but the job never leaves you. And in the quiet hours when the wind rustles the trees just right, or a shadow moves where it shouldn't, you remember not just what you did, but how it felt. The tension, the pain, the sheer grinding effort of staying alive in a world built to erase you. You remember, and your body tightens again. It's instinct, and it never really stops. That's the hidden cost of this life, the one no one talks about. Not the blood, not the betrayal, not the fear, but the toll it takes on the very bones you live in. You were made into a weapon, and weapons, when used, too often begin to crack, quietly, from the inside. You've survived longer than most. Your hands bear the stories, your bones carry the consequences. And though the world still sees you as sharp, dangerous, unshakable, you know better. Because even the finest blade dulls eventually. It doesn't happen all at once. There's no single moment you wake up and realize you can't do it anymore. No dramatic fall from a rooftop. No grand betrayal that sends you fleeing into the night for good. Instead, it's subtle, gradual. It starts with the delay. That half-second longer it takes you to react. The voice in your head that says, wait, when once it would have said, go. You begin second-guessing your steps, your targets, your instincts. And in this line of work, hesitation is its own kind of death. You notice it in your routines, too. You used to map an escape route without thinking. Now it takes effort. You used to remember every creaking floorboard, every guard rotation. Now you catch yourself forgetting. You have to ask again. Recheck your notes. And you start to wonder, when did I become slow? Your body confirms it. The pain lingers longer. The bruises darken deeper. A jump you could have made 10 years ago now leaves you winded. You land wrong more often. You fall harder. And when you do get hurt, you don't bounce back the same way. What used to be a 2-day limp becomes a 2-week recovery. You tell yourself you can still do it, that you just need more time to prepare, a longer rest, one more careful plan. But deep down, you know, you've crossed an invisible line. Some assassins ignore it. They keep taking jobs, keep pushing their bodies, keep trying to outpace their own decline. But the work is merciless, and it doesn't slow down just because you do. One day, you run into a door that's locked when you expected it open. You fumble a throw. Your foot slips on wet stone. A young guard you would have outmatched years ago lands a blow. Just one. And it's enough. Others try to pivot. Use their experience. Take on quieter jobs. Less killing. More gathering information. More sabotage. More manipulation. They become brokers, handlers, advisors to the next generation of killers. But the truth is, it's not the same. Because the thrill, the silence before the strike, the rush of the escape, the weight of a life taken, it never really leaves you. You were shaped by it, sharpened by it, defined by it. You can't replace that feeling with maps and coin exchanges. So some try to retire completely. They find a quiet place, far from cities, far from whispers. Maybe a cabin, maybe a crumbling stone house in a forgotten village. They tell themselves it's over, that they're done, that no one remembers their name, that they can finally rest. But rest doesn't come easy, because the habits don't fade. You still check the windows. You still reach for the knife when a branch snaps outside. You still wake at midnight, listening for footsteps that aren't there. And sometimes they are there, because even if you've slowed down, the world hasn't. Someone always remembers. Someone always finds you. An old enemy, a surviving witness, a young assassin eager to make a name by killing a legend. You become the target. You see it in their eyes, the hunger, the calculation. You recognize yourself in them. And that's what hurts the most, because you know how this game ends. Sometimes you escape. You outsmart them. One more time, but it costs you. More pain, more hiding. And the quiet you worked so hard to build begins to crack. Other times, you don't escape, and there's no one to mourn you, because the life you lived required silence, distance. You left no friends behind, no family, no allies to speak your name in kindness. If someone finds your body, they won't know who you were. Just another traveler, another old man who died in the woods, another woman whose cabin burned mysteriously in the night. No one connects it to the whisper that once made lords flinch. And if someone does remember, they won't say it out loud, because you weren't a hero. You weren't a villain either. You were something else, something the world doesn't know how to honor or forgive. So your name fades. Your legend gets tangled up in others. They start to say it wasn't one person, but many. It wasn't real, just a story. But stories have power. And even as your own hands grow unsteady, your back aches and your eyes lose their sharpness, the stories remain. Somewhere, someone will still whisper about you. Maybe not by name, maybe not with accuracy, but the shape of you, the myth of you, lingers. Because fear lives longer than flesh. That's the strange gift of a life like yours. You don't get a monument, but you might get remembered. Not as you were, but as something bigger, sharper, colder, a blade that never dulled, even if you did. By the time the blade dulls, by the time your bones ache and your instincts lag, you begin to wonder what, if anything, you've left behind. You don't say it aloud. Assassins don't speak of legacy. Not in taverns, not in temples, not even in the dark when no one's around. But you think about it. It creeps in when the fire burns low, when the job is finished, and your reward lies heavy in your hands. You wonder, what was it for? What comes of a life lived in shadows when there's no one left to carry your name? Because there won't be stories told in your honor. There won't be a gravestone. No children passing down tales of your cleverness or courage. No villagers lighting candles on your death day. You'll vanish the same way you lived, quietly, completely, and without ceremony. And yet, something remains. Not in stone, not in songs, but in the shape of fear you left behind. Maybe it's in the nobleman who now hires 2 tasters instead of 1, ever since his cousin never made it to supper. Or the merchant who double locks his door at night, remembering what happened to his rival in a town too far away to be coincidence. It's in the guard who flinches at a sudden sound in the corridor, because once long ago he heard a scream that ended too quickly. You're not remembered as a person. You're remembered as an event, a lesson, a consequence. And that's its own kind of legacy. But there's something lonelier, too quieter. The ghost you leave isn't just in other people's fear. It's in the young ones who follow your path. They don't know your face. They've never seen you work. But they've heard the whispers, the myth, the outline of someone who could walk through locked doors and never be seen. Someone who made kings nervous. Someone who never missed. And so they try to become you. They find their first blade. Learn to climb. Learn to disappear. They listen to rumors in taverns, take small jobs, chase the trail of your legend like it's a map to something bigger. But they're chasing a shadow, because the truth. Your truth isn't in the stories they tell. It's in the weight you carried, the silence, the fear, the aching joints and sleepless nights, the isolation that crept in no matter how fast you ran. You wish you could warn them. You wish you could say, don't believe the stories. The price isn't in the blood you spill, it's in everything you lose along the way. But no one listens to ghosts, so you leave no message, no monument, no final confession scrawled on parchment, just a presence, a flicker of movement at the edge of memory, a breath of cold in a warm room. The feeling someone was here, and now they're gone, and they took something with them. That's how your legacy survives. And yet, sometimes, if you're very lucky, you leave behind something more. Not a monument, no. Not praise or recognition. But maybe a lesson. Maybe a warning. A whisper passed between men in power. Don't cross the wrong person. Don't make enemies in silence. Don't think your title will protect you. Because somewhere out there in the corners of the world, someone once proved otherwise. That was you. A ghost with a knife. A name spoken only when the doors are locked and the torches are dimmed. They say history is written by victors. But you weren't a king. You weren't a general. You didn't win wars. You ended lives quietly, precisely without recognition. You didn't write history. But you interrupted it. You removed names before they could sign their treaties. You cut threads before they became banners. You changed lines in the story, just a few, but enough to shift kingdoms. And no one knew it was you. No one will. But the change remains. In that sense, your legacy is like everything else about you hidden. Felt but not seen. Known but not understood. And maybe that's fitting. You were never meant to be remembered clearly. You were meant to be a question, a cold breath down someone's neck, a hesitation in a moment of pride, a reminder that for all the power they held, someone once stood closer than they ever realized, with a blade and a choice. And they lived, or didn't, because of you. Even now, years later, when your hands are slower and your memory is frayed, the truth holds its weight. You were a ghost in history, but ghosts leave chills. And someone always notices the cold. So if there's a legacy to speak of, it's this. You didn't need monuments. You were the shadow that made the stone tremble. So your legacy lingers not in marble or ink, but in fear, in hesitation, in the brief silence before a decision is made. You were never meant to be remembered clearly, just felt faintly like a shiver that no one could quite explain. But what happens when even that fades? What happens when the last noble who feared you dies in his sleep? When the guards you once outran grow old and are replaced by younger men who've never heard your name? When the whispers quiet and the world keeps turning, it always does. That's the thing no one tells you. Not when you start, not when you're at your most feared, not even when you're at your most broken. The world forgets. It forgets you faster than you thought it would. You spent years carving through history with careful precision, shaping events from the shadows. And then, just like that, your absence becomes background noise. Your silence is no longer feared. It's simply unnoticed. New threats rise. New stories are told. New names are whispered. And you who once moved unseen through corridors of power are no longer mentioned at all. At first, you notice small things. The contact who once left notes under a certain stone doesn't leave them anymore. The man who paid you in lions stops sending messengers. The tavern owner who always looked twice now just hands you your drink and turns away. It's not hostility. It's not even suspicion. It's something colder. Indifference. Not because they discovered what you were, but because they didn't. Because your story is no longer being told. You've become what most assassins eventually become. A memory that even those who remember don't bother to repeat. Not out of fear, but because something newer has taken your place. A younger blade, a louder name, a fresher story. You're still alive, but you're already a ghost. That's when the loneliness sharpens. Not the old kind, the protective practiced solitude you once wore like armor. No, this is something deeper. A kind of invisibility you didn't choose. A kind that doesn't protect you anymore. It just swallows you. You walk through cities you used to know like the back of your hand, and no one glances twice. The alleys you used to vanish into are still there, but now they're just alleys. You sleep in the woods, not because it's safer, but because there's no reason not to. No one is waiting for you anywhere. No one's looking for you. You begin to wonder if you were ever real to them. Were you just a story they told to make themselves feel small? Was your name ever spoken with truth or only fear? And if no one remembers what you did, if the weight of it disappears, does the burden get lighter? The answer is no. You still carry it, because your body remembers. Your mind remembers. The blade in your hand may be unused now, but your fingers know the way it feels. The hesitation in your chest when someone knocks at your door. That doesn't go away. The instinct to check the corners of every room, to never sit with your back to the door that stays. You've stopped being the thing others fear, but you can't stop fearing yourself. And that's a strange place to be. To know what you're capable of. To remember the silence that followed your footsteps. To know how easy it would be still to slip back into it all. If the coin was right. If the name was right. If the silence inside you grew too loud to ignore. Because even as the world forgets you, The part of you that remembers never truly lets go. You think of it late at night. The clean kills. The messy ones. The moments that went according to plan. The ones that nearly killed you. The ones that should have. You think of the people who never knew your name but paid the price for what you did. The collateral. The witnesses. The wrong person at the wrong time. You try not to dwell, but memories have a strange way of surviving even when everything else fades. You remember someone's eyes, a sound, the last breath of someone who didn't expect you, and those pieces, they stay sharp long after the blade has dulled. So you walk, you wait, and you wonder, not if you'll be remembered, but if you should be. If the forgetting is a kind of mercy. If being erased is the closest thing to forgiveness someone like you will ever get. Because fame was never your goal, nor infamy. You wanted to survive, to be useful, to stay one step ahead. But now the world has stopped chasing. It doesn't look for you. It doesn't name you. It doesn't fear you. It just moves on. And you remain alive, still breathing, but no longer seen. And that somehow is harder than being hunted. Because when you were hunted, you had purpose. When you were feared, you had weight. Now you're not the assassin in the stories. You're not even the shadow in the corner. You're the man at the edge of the village, the one no one really notices. The woman in the back of the market who doesn't speak. You're the traveler who doesn't stay long. The eyes that seem older than the face. The hands that never quite rest. You're still here, but you've been left behind. And in some quiet way, you understand. Because ghosts aren't meant to stay in the story. They're meant to vanish when the chapter ends. And yours long ago already did. You're still breathing, still walking, still watching the world forget you. And for a while, you accept it. The fading, the quiet. The isolation that isn't just physical anymore, it's something deeper now. You've let go of the blade. You've buried the tools. You've told yourself it's over, but it never really is. Because one day, something shifts. It could be anything. A name you overhear in a tavern. A man who walks like someone you once knew. A child wearing a crest you thought had been burned into dust. Something rises in you. Not rage, not grief, not even purpose. Just the old voice. Quiet. Familiar. Go. You try to ignore it. You drink. You walk away. You close your eyes and remind yourself that the world has moved on, and you've survived. You've outlived your usefulness, outlived the fear, outlived the myth. But temptation doesn't knock loudly. It slips under the door, and suddenly, just one more job doesn't sound like madness. It sounds like closure, because maybe there's a debt still unpaid. Maybe there's a name you never crossed off. Maybe it's not about coin anymore. Maybe it's about proving to yourself, not to them, that you're still capable. That the shadow of who you were still lingers inside the worn frame of who you've become. So you start to sharpen again. Not the blade, not yet. Your mind. You walk the streets differently. You observe. You measure. You feel the way your weight shifts on old bones, the way your feet land on familiar terrain. There's muscle memory dormant, but not dead. And you begin to remember what it felt like to be precise, to be dangerous. You find the knife where you left it. Rusted, yes, but still sharp enough. A part of you smiles at that. The blade remembers too. It's not just the act of killing that tempts you. It's everything that surrounds it. The clarity. When the mission begins, everything else fades. The ache in your back, the weight in your chest, the blur of memories. All of it goes quiet. There is only the plan, the path, the target. Its purpose distilled to its purest form. For a moment, you're not forgotten. You're focused. But you lie to yourself too. You say it's just this once. Just to close the book. Just to even a score. You tell yourself you're not going back, this is different. This is personal. But it's not. It's the life calling you home. The one place where you still know who you are. Where you're not the old man muttering to himself or the woman strangers avoid on the road. In this role, you're still someone. Not to the world, but to yourself. The planning comes faster than you expect. You map the building in your mind. Count the windows. Time the patrols. You anticipate angles, doors, weather. It feels like breathing. Like slipping into a coat you haven't worn in years and finding it still fits tight but familiar. And yet, something's changed. You move slower. You're more cautious. You double-check what you used to trust without question. There's doubt now, a shadow that wasn't there before. But you keep going. The night comes. You don't tell anyone. You don't leave a note. You don't say a prayer. You simply move. The silence wraps around you like it always did. The world shrinks to the space between you and the task. Each step a memory. Each breath a ritual. You find the target not with ease, but with certainty. You're not as fast as you once were, not as smooth, but you're still sharp in the ways that matter. And when the moment comes, it happens cleanly, quietly, as it always did. As if the years between now and your last kill never passed. But something unexpected happens in the aftermath. You don't feel the rush. You don't feel victorious. You feel tired. Not the tired that sleep cures. Not even the tired of age. This is something heavier. A tiredness in your spirit. In the part of you that once felt alive in this moment. Now all it feels is done. You leave as you always have. Without fanfare. Without notice. But this time, when you disappear into the woods, into the fog, into the folds of the world that still has space for people like you, you feel the weight differently. Because this really was the last one. Not because you say so. Because you know. Because your hands are slower now. Because your mind, though sharp, is quieter. Because the person you used to be has finally stopped whispering. And when you return to the silence, it doesn't feel like failure anymore. It feels like release. The temptation is gone. The knife stays sheathed not out of fear or caution, but because the part of you that reached for it has finally let go. You were an assassin once, but now you are just someone who remembers. You told yourself it was the last one, and this time you meant it. There was no fire behind it, no ceremony, just stillness. A strange kind of stillness, the kind that comes after a long storm, not triumphant, not tragic, just quiet. Like something inside you has finally stopped moving. The blade is back in its place now, not hidden, not buried, just resting. As if it too understands that its time is done. And so now you ask yourself, maybe for the first time in full honesty, what's left of me? Because for so long, you were the knife. You were the mission. You were the shadow slipping through walls, the answer to a desperate whisper, the thing that moved when nothing else could. But now that movement is over. Now you sit still. You wake with no plan. You walk with no purpose beyond getting to the next patch of shade or the next dry firewood. The tension that once held your body upright has begun to soften. Your fingers twitch less at unfamiliar sounds. Your breath is deeper now, and it's strange. You'd think that peace would feel like relief, but it doesn't not at first. At first it feels like loss, because purpose, even a dark one, fills space. Now that space is empty, and it echoes. There's no one left to chase you. No one left to fear you. You're not hiding anymore, but you're not returning anywhere either. There is no home waiting, no hearth, no open arms, just trees. Quiet, a slow fire, a single bowl for soup. So you begin to ask a different kind of question. Who am I without the blade? And that's a hard question. Not because you don't have an answer, but because you never learned how to ask it. Your life was defined by what you did, not what you believed, not who you loved, not what made you laugh. Just the job, the next step, the silence before the strike, the escape. You never had time to build a self. You were too busy surviving. But now, with time stretching long and quiet before you, the question presses in. So you try. You plant something, just a few seeds. They don't take knot at first. But the act of kneeling in the soil, of doing something with your hands that doesn't involve a blade, feels new, honest. A small rebellion against the person you used to be. You fish badly. You whittle poorly. You build a chair that creaks so loud it scares the birds off for miles. And still, you keep going. Because even if you don't know what you are now, you know what you're not. You're not a killer anymore. And slowly, gently, you begin to notice things you hadn't before. The way the mist rolls over the fields in the early morning. The way birds warn each other before the rain comes. The sound of wind through pines that somehow always seems to carry memory. You hear your own breath, steady and unhurried. You sleep, truly sleep, for the first time in years. The dreams still come, but they are softer now, less jagged, less soaked in blood and echoing silence. Sometimes you even see a version of yourself in them that you don't quite recognize, someone younger smiling. It unsettles you. But it also stays with you long after the dream ends, because that version of you, the one you could have been if life had bent a different way, is still in there. Maybe not fully, maybe not loudly, but enough to reach for a second bowl, enough to feed a stray dog that starts following you, enough to build a second chair, just in case. You don't expect anyone, but still, you find yourself talking sometimes, not to the dog, not to the trees, just aloud, remembering, saying things you've never said, names, places, regrets, gratitude even. No one hears them, but you say them anyway, and in that saying, something lifts. Because the silence you carried for so long, the silence that once protected you, once defined you, it begins to dissolve. Not in noise, but in honesty, in the gentle truth of being allowed to speak at all. You were never allowed that before. You were a secret, a weapon, a myth. Now you're something else. Not a farmer, not a monk, not a wanderer. You haven't named it yet. Maybe you never will, but it's real. It's you. And in time, you start to let it be enough. The scars remain. So do the memories. The blade, though untouched, still holds its weight. You don't forget what you were. You don't try to erase it. You just stop letting it be the only thing that defines you. There's no redemption in this. No dramatic change of heart. No forgiveness. No redemption arc. Just a man, just a woman who has stopped running, stopped killing, and started listening to the quiet in a different way. Not as a warning, but as a welcome. You're still not sure if it will last. Part of you will always flinch when the wind shifts too suddenly. You'll always hear footsteps half a second before they're real. That part doesn't go away, but it doesn't lead anymore. It just walks beside you. And in that quiet, something new begins. Something fragile, something honest. Maybe it's not peace, but it's the beginning of it. So you've begun to slow, to settle, to grow something fragile in the stillness. A kind of quiet that doesn't come from fear, but from peace you're still learning to believe in. But peace, like all things, is not permanent. Because the past, even when buried deep, doesn't rot the way you think it should. It waits. It lingers in old paths, in faces, half remembered, in names, spoken too close to your fire when you thought no one knew where you were. It starts small. Maybe a rider passes your cottage and pauses a little too long. Maybe a face in the market holds your gaze for a beat too many. Or maybe it's just a feeling, a sudden stillness in the trees. A hush in the wind that reminds you of the nights before something bad used to happen. You tell yourself you're imagining it, that it's the old instincts kicking up dust in your bones. But then something changes. A question at the well, someone asking about a traveler who lives on the edge of town. A note left near your door with no signature. A symbol scratched into your fence post, small, precise, and unmistakably familiar. It's not panic that fills you. Not anymore. It's something colder, sharper. Recognition. Because you know what this is. You've seen it before. You've been it before. Someone's watching. Maybe it's a grudge. Maybe it's a bounty. Maybe it's one of those new blades chasing the shape of the legend you used to be. Or maybe it's something worse, someone from before someone who never quite let you go. You don't run. Not this time. But you prepare. Quietly. Deliberately. The blade is cleaned. Oiled. Not out of hunger, but out of habit. You walk the perimeter again. You listen to the land like you used to. You remind yourself which floorboards creak in your own home, which ones don't. It all comes back faster than you'd like your body never truly believed the peace you tried to give it. You consider leaving, not out of fear, just to avoid breaking what you've built. But something inside you resists. You've earned this quiet, and you're tired of giving things away just because someone else came looking. So you stay, you wait, and eventually the past does more than knock. It steps across the threshold. Maybe it's a face you know. Maybe it's a message from someone who thought you were dead. Maybe it's a child asking about a name you haven't used in 20 years. Whatever form it takes, it's not loud. That's what surprises you. It's not violence or threats or blood. It's memory. It's the way someone says your name, the real one, and doesn't flinch. It's the way they know what you were, and they don't run. It's the way they sit down across from you calmly and ask, "Was it true?" And suddenly, you're no longer just a blade or a ghost. You're a story, and someone has come looking for the ending. You're careful with your words. You always have been. But now, more than ever, because you realize something you hadn't before. People don't come seeking your past just to judge it. They come because your past echoes into theirs. You see it in their eyes. Maybe they're lost. Maybe they're angry. Maybe they've seen too much too young, and they want to know if survival means becoming what you once were. You don't offer answers. You offer truth. That survival has a cost. That silence protects, but it also starves. That the blade is never just a tool. It's a weight. And once you lift it, it never fully leaves your hand. You don't glamorize it. You don't apologize for it either. You speak plainly. And when you finish, they don't thank you. They don't hug you. They just understand or try to. And then they leave. But something's different now. Because the past didn't come back to punish you. It came to remember, and it didn't break you. It listened. That night, the air is lighter. You still sleep lightly, but not out of fear, just out of habit. And this time, when the wind shifts, you don't reach for the blade. You just breathe. Because the shadows may return. The world may remember. Someone may knock again. But this time, you won't disappear. You've already done that once. Now you remain. Not as a legend, not as a ghost, but as someone who lived, and who somehow kept living. After the past found its way back to you and left without blood, something shifted, something subtle but lasting. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, you weren't just watching the world. You were part of it again. Not fully, not loudly, but something inside you began to loosen, just slightly. You didn't become a new person overnight. You didn't throw open the shutters and announce yourself to the village. That's not how it works, not for people like you. But maybe just once you lingered a little longer in the market. Maybe your answers grew a little fuller when someone asked where you came from. Maybe you stopped turning every question into a threat. And maybe someone noticed, not in the way they used to. Not with fear or suspicion or whispers. This time, they noticed you. Not what you were, just what you were. Now, a man carrying firewood before the rain. A woman mending a fence before the frost sets in. A quiet figure who returns a nod slowly and means it. At first, it's uncomfortable, being seen, because for so long, invisibility was safety. Being forgettable was freedom. The less they knew, the longer you lived. But this kind of attention is different. It's small, gentle. Someone leaves bread at your door not out of obligation, but because they made extra. Someone asks if you'll help fix a roof, not because they know you're capable, but because they trust you enough to ask. It's not praise. It's not awe. It's inclusion. And that is harder to accept than you thought it would be, because being feared was easier in some ways. You never had to answer to it. But kindness asks you to show up, to open a door that's been closed for years. So you hesitate. You say no the first few times. You nod politely, but keep your hands to yourself. You still listen for footsteps, still check your shadow. But slowly, the hesitation softens. You say yes once, just once. You help move stones from a collapsed shed. It's hard on your back, harder than it used to be. But no one watches you for weakness. They just say, thank you. And you realize something you hadn't before. All your life, you've worked alone. You've trained alone. You've run alone. You survived because you never relied on anyone but yourself. But maybe now you don't have to. That idea frightens you. Not because it's dangerous, but because it's foreign. You don't know how to trust. Not really. Not with anything that matters. You've spent so long bracing for betrayal that you forgot what it feels like to relax your grip, to ask for help, to laugh without checking the exits. But one day it happens. Something small. A moment you don't notice until after it's passed. You share a story, just a piece of one. You let your guard down for a breath too long. You smile, and someone smiles back not because they're afraid, but because they're glad. And it doesn't hurt. It feels human. You begin to understand what the blade took from you, not just lives, not just peace, but connection. You see now how much of yourself you gave away in silence, and how long it's taken to begin getting any of it back. This is not redemption. No one asks you to confess. No one demands penance. You don't need to earn your place here with apologies. You don't know how to speak. You're not trying to make up for what you've done. You're just living, and that's enough. It has to be, because the past isn't something you erase. It's something you carry. The difference now is you're not carrying it alone. Someone notices when you're gone for too long. Someone asks how your leg is healing after you slipped by the stream. Someone makes room beside you at the fire without asking questions about who you used to be. And in those small moments, you realize something else. They know, or they suspect. Not the whole story. Not the names or the numbers. But enough. Enough to understand that you've come from something dark. That you've walked through shadows and didn't come out untouched. And still, they sit beside you. Still, they offer you bread. Still, they ask you to stay for another round of cider. Still, they speak your name without flinching, because maybe they see something in you you've stopped seeing in yourself. Not a weapon, not a threat, just a person. You don't tell them everything. You never will, but you tell them something. And that's where it begins. That slow, careful return. Not to innocence. That's long gone. But to belonging. You still wake at odd hours. You still keep the blade within reach. You still watch shadows longer than most would. But you're no longer alone in the morning. Someone waves when you pass. Someone calls your name. Someone sees you and doesn't run. That's not peace. Not yet. But it's the road toward it. And this time, you're not walking it in silence. So now you're here. Not the same as you were, but not entirely new either. You've learned how to be seen without flinching. You've accepted that people can look at you without suspicion. That a question isn't always a trap. That silence can be comfort, not just cover. But the blade is still there. Not in your hand, not even in your belt anymore, but in your memory, in your muscle, in the way you notice movement at the edge of your vision, even while chopping wood or walking home with a basket of kindling. It's not paranoia anymore. It's something gentler, a shadow that walks beside you, not to warn you, not to weigh you down, just to remind you who you were. Because even now, with the world no longer chasing you with a life that doesn't revolve around the next name, the next map, the next escape, you haven't forgotten, and you never will. But the difference now is this: the knife no longer defines you. You don't wake because you're waiting for an intruder. You wake because the light is soft through the window and the birds are already singing. You don't sit with your back to the wall because you're afraid. You sit by the fire because it's warm and someone brought extra blankets for the cold. There was a time when that change would have felt like weakness. You would have told yourself you're going soft. You're losing your edge. You're making yourself vulnerable. But that voice is quieter now, and it's no longer the one you listen to first, because you've come to understand something. There is no glory in holding on to sharpness when you no longer need to cut. There is strength in setting down the weapon and not needing it to feel strong. There is power in choosing gentleness after a life spent dealing in silence and death, and it's not easy. You still tense when voices rise in argument. You still notice the weight of every heavy footstep outside your door. You still keep the blade somewhere close, not for use, but for memory. But you no longer reach for it first. That's the change. Not the absence of danger, but the presence of trust. Not the erasure of instinct, but the layering of something else on top of it, humanity. You've stopped measuring people by how easily they could be killed. You've started noticing how carefully they hold each other when they think no one's looking. You've begun to see the world not in terms of threats and exits and blind spots, but in terms of possibility. You ask yourself questions now that you never would have allowed before. What do I enjoy? What makes me laugh without guilt or tension? What kind of person do I want to be now that I don't need to be a weapon? They're not easy questions. You don't always have answers. But the asking is its own kind of healing. Some days are better than others. There are mornings when you forget that you ever carried a life on the edge of a blade, and there are nights when it all comes back in a flood. You don't push those memories away anymore. You let them come. You let yourself feel them. Not to relive them, not to punish yourself, but to honor the person who survived, because that's what this is now. Not a life of penance, but a life of honoring the one you had to live and learning how to live differently now. You meet others like you from time to time. Not assassins, not exactly, but people who've had to do hard things, who've carried secrets too long, who know what it means to wake from a life that demanded too much and offered too little. You don't talk about the old days, but you know each other all the same. It's in the way your eyes meet, the way your silences line up, the way you both understand that being here, being alive, is a choice you're making every day. Not because it's easy, but because it's possible. And maybe that's what freedom really is. Not the ability to run, but the choice to stay. To be kind, not because you have to be, but because now, finally, you can. To let go of the blade as a part of your identity, and let it become only a part of your past. To exist not as a shadow, not as a threat, not as a forgotten name in the dark, but as someone present, someone real, someone who remembers but no longer lives there. There's peace in that. Not a dramatic, sweeping peace, not the kind sung about in stories or carved into stone, but a quiet, steady peace. A fire that stays lit through the winter, a roof that holds under the rain, a life that asks nothing of you except that you live it. And so you do, not to prove anything, not to redeem anything, but because you can, because at last the knife is no longer who you are, and for the first time that feels enough. You've set the blade down, not just for the night, not just until someone comes looking. You've set it down with intention, not out of defeat, not from exhaustion, but because finally you've stepped into a space where fear doesn't lead you anymore. You didn't notice the shift at first. It didn't come with fanfare or a moment of clarity. It came slowly, like the way day breaks over the hills. One morning you woke up and realized you hadn't checked the door 3 times before bed. A few nights later, you noticed you had drifted into sleep without the blade under your pillow. Small things, gentle things, and all of them pointing to the same truth: you no longer live in constant anticipation of danger. You used to believe that fear kept you alive, that staying sharp meant staying one step ahead. And maybe that was true once. In the life you lived before, fear was your compass. It told you when to move, when to run, when to strike. But it also told you to hold your breath, to stay silent, to keep people at a distance. It whispered lies that felt like truth. You can't rest, you can't trust, you can't stop. And for years you believed it. You built a life around it. You wore it like armor. But now that armor has rusted. Not because you've grown careless, but because you no longer need it to survive. You've lived in this new rhythm long enough to recognize its texture. Days come and go without violence. People pass by and mean you no harm. You walk into the village and your steps no longer echo with suspicion. You nod to the baker, and he nods back, not with caution, but with familiarity. One afternoon, as you help someone stack firewood, you catch yourself laughing. The sound surprises you, not because it's rare, but because it's easy. There's no edge to it, no performance, no shadow behind the moment. It just is. And that evening, when you sit by your fire, you realize something profound. You're not waiting for the other shoe to drop. You used to be the kind of person who watched windows from the corner of the room, who tracked every movement in the reflection of a spoon, who mapped exits the moment they walked into a place, even homes, even friends' homes. But now, you sit by the window with the shutters open. You leave your coat on the hook instead of by the door. You walk home in the dark and don't count the number of steps to cover before the gate. It's not carelessness. It's trust. You trust this space. You trust this life. Not blindly. You're still aware. You still notice small things, flickers in the brush changes in people's posture. But you don't respond the same way. You don't assume every noise means danger. You don't prepare for an attack every time someone raises their voice. And that change, that softening it, took time. It also took courage, because fear had become a habit. Letting it go felt risky at first, vulnerable. But with every small decision, to walk slowly, to make conversation, to sleep deeply, you proved something to yourself: the war is over. Maybe not in the world, but in you. You no longer measure the distance between safety and harm every waking second. You no longer study a man's boots to guess his speed. You no longer imagine which bones would break fastest if someone lunged at you. Those calculations used to be automatic. Now they're just quiet, faded, not gone, but no longer steering the wheel. You've even begun to notice beauty again. Not the kind you used to use for cover or distraction. Real beauty. A patch of moss glowing in late afternoon light. The way a child's laugh cuts through heavy air. The feeling of warm bread between your palms. These things didn't vanish in the old life. They were just invisible, filtered out by the urgency of survival. Now they're here. Now you see them. And they feel like gifts. One evening, you're invited to dinner. Not as a test, not as a courtesy. Just because someone likes you. And you go. You sit at a table where no one's armed. You pass plates. You listen to stories that have no secret meaning. And when someone makes a joke, you laugh again, this time louder. And again, it surprises you. On the way home that night, you look up at the stars and realize your heart hasn't quickened once all evening. No cold sweat. No heavy pulse. Just breath. just life. You exhale, and it's not a release, it's a recognition. This is what safety feels like when it's real. You still keep a blade in the drawer. You probably always will. Not because you expect to use it, but because it reminds you of who you were. And because it reminds you of how far you've come. There are still moments, shadows at the edge of your vision, a scream carried too clearly in the wind that make your shoulders tense. But they pass. You let them pass. You don't chase them. You don't build plans around them. You sit with them, breathe through them, and let them go. Because this version of you, the one who walks unarmed into a conversation, who accepts help without reading it for threat, who plants herbs not for poison, but for tea, this version is no longer afraid. This version doesn't need to flinch when someone knocks, doesn't need to question every kindness, doesn't need to look over their shoulder on a sunny morning. You've stopped bracing. That's the truth of it. And in that stillness, you found something you never expected peace that holds. Not a temporary shelter, not a lull between storms, a steady, lasting quiet. One that doesn't break. One that doesn't feel like waiting. One that feels like home. You don't know exactly when it started. This quiet transformation. This slow, invisible reshaping of who you are. It didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It settled in the way a river carves a new path, not by force, but by time. One day, you simply noticed that you were no longer living in reaction to the world. You were beginning, in small ways, to live by choice. It began with routine. Not the kind you once used to control the day and reduce risk, but the kind that brings rhythm, softness, and familiarity. You wake up not because you have to, but because you want to. You step outside to feel the weather, not to scan the horizon. You sweep the floor not for distraction, but because a clean space feels good. You cook meals with care. You take time arranging things, small details you never used to allow yourself to notice. The way sunlight spills through the eastern window. The weight of a ceramic bowl in your hands. These things matter now. They center you, and slowly, a sense of self begins to emerge. One not bound to secrecy shadows or the constant need to adapt. You begin to ask yourself, without panic, what kind of person am I when no one's watching? It's a question that would have been dangerous, even laughable in your old life. Back then, identity was just another costume. A tool. Something crafted carefully to serve a purpose, to match a name you might abandon tomorrow. But now, there's no one to fool. No need to wear anything but your truth. You notice the little things that make you you. How you hum while chopping vegetables. How you instinctively wipe your hands on your apron even when it's already clean. How you prefer the sound of the river to the noise of a crowd. You don't have to explain these things to anyone. They simply are. And the longer you live without fear, the more they return. Habits that aren't rooted in survival. Preferences you never had the space to explore. Comforts that grow quietly in stillness. Sometimes when you're alone for long enough, memories surface that feel like they belong to someone else. The person you were, sharp-focused, ruthless. In ways you had to be, feels distant now. You don't deny that version of yourself. You respect them. They got you here. But they're not who you are anymore. They were forged in fire. You're learning how to grow in calm. And that shift is everything. You don't need to prove anything. Not to others. Not even to yourself. For the first time, you're not chasing redemption. You're not trying to balance the scale. You're simply being. Present in the life you've shaped. A life without missions, without orders, without aliases. A life with simple things, stacks of firewood, the scent of dried lavender, the sound of distant church bells, a chair you built that doesn't wobble anymore. These things may seem small, but to you they are monumental. proof that permanence is possible. That you too were always capable of building, not just destroying. You've started writing things down. Not a diary. That word feels too exposed, too formal. But notes, thoughts, small reflections scratched into a book that you hide under the floorboards, not because it contains secrets, but because it contains you. Honest pieces of thought that aren't filtered through strategy or necessity. Some pages are just about the weather. Others are about things you tasted, dreams you had, feelings you didn't expect. One page just says, "Today I felt safe again," and that matters. Because for so long, safety was only ever a pause between threats. Now it's becoming a constant. And in that constant you grow. You change. You start thinking about things that never used to have room in your mind. Things like, what would it mean to share your life with someone not for cover, not for strategy, but for comfort, for joy, for the long nights and the cold winters and the harvest seasons that need more than two hands. You haven't acted on that thought yet. Maybe you won't. Maybe it's just something that lives in the corner of your heart for now. But even having the thought is progress. It's proof that your mind is beginning to believe what your body has already started to feel, that you're no longer a danger to be near, that your life isn't poison to others, that love or at least companionship could be something possible, not just dangerous. You've also begun to notice how you respond to others in ways that surprise you. You're kinder than you expected, gentle even. You have patience you didn't think you had. Maybe it's because you understand suffering. Maybe it's because you've lived with silence long enough to appreciate the sound of honest conversation. Or maybe it's because you finally have enough of yourself to share. The people in your village don't know your whole story. They don't need to. What matters is that they greet you by name, that they invite you to gatherings, that they miss you when you're gone too long. You're not just surviving among them, you're part of them. Fully, quietly, undramatically. You're someone now, and not because you saved them or scared them or earned their trust through feats of skill. Just because you stayed. Because you showed up every day and lived honestly. Because you let them see a little more of you each time. And so here you are, no longer flinching at shadows, no longer waiting for your past to pull you backward. You're not just a former assassin, a shadow, a tool once wielded by someone else. You're someone new, someone whole, someone real. You still carry your past. It's in your gait, your reflexes, your silence when the wind shifts. But it's not a weight now. It's just part of the story. And this life you've built is a story still unfolding. One without blood on the first page. One that begins not with an order, but with a decision to stay, to breathe, to become. You're still becoming, every day. And for the first time, you're not afraid of what you might turn into. So much of your life was spent in motion, running toward something, running from something, or worse, standing still while everything inside you kept moving. You were always adjusting, calculating, reacting. Now for the first time, you're not moving at all, and it doesn't feel like danger. It feels like peace. You live your days as they come, not urgently, not cautiously, simply. You rise early, not from restlessness, but from rhythm. The fire takes easily now, the way it always does when you've chopped enough wood and kept it dry. You move through familiar tasks with no need for thought, stirring oats, sweeping the porch, feeding the hens. Your hands remember these things now, more than your body remembers the grip of a knife. There are no missions, no objectives. You're not waiting for a knock at the door. You're not preparing for departure. You're rooted. And more importantly, you've chosen to be. It's a strange realization when it finally lands that the life you feared would never belong to you is now the one you've built for yourself. brick by brick, day by day. You didn't arrive at it by chance. You didn't fall into it. You stayed long enough. You softened slowly enough. You endured through the quiet, and it welcomed you in return. People still come and go from the village. Some are new. They bring stories of other places, talk of war, of distant unrest, of things you once would have needed to know. Now you listen without fear. Those stories are no longer yours to carry. You nod, offer them tea, and wish them safe travels. And then you go back to your garden, to your path, to the life that is only yours now. You're no longer the blade, no longer the whisper in the dark. You're someone who knows the sharpness of the world, but chooses to speak softly. And that choice, that quiet choice, holds more power than any dagger ever did. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence, a child wanders up to ask your name. Not the name you once used in the shadows, the real one. The name that was buried under 100 false lives, only now beginning to bloom again. You give it without hesitation. And when the child repeats it aloud, it feels right in a way that stuns you. Not like reclaiming something lost, but like finally speaking a truth that had waited patiently inside you for years. That night you sit by your hearth with a cup of warm cider. Outside, the wind moves through the trees like a lullaby. You're not watching for movement. You're not guarding an exit. You're simply present, fully calmly, wonderfully present. And in that moment, a question rises in you that you would have never dared ask before. What comes next? Not because you are restless, not because you need to run again, but because you've arrived somewhere solid, and now you have space, real honest space to imagine forward. You could build something, teach someone, write stories maybe, or just keep doing what you're doing one day after the next because, finally, that's enough. You realize that endings are not always dramatic. They don't come with a final battle or a last goodbye. Sometimes they arrive in a whisper, in the way your shoulders no longer ache from tension, in the way your hands are used more for planting than striking, in the way your sleep is deep, undisturbed, and dreamless. That is your ending, not a scene, not a moment, but a condition, a quiet that endures, a life that holds. You visit the river sometimes, the same one you crossed long ago when you first came to this place. You sit by its edge and watch it move steady, endless, without struggle. It reminds you of something important, that healing isn't about forgetting or undoing what's been done. It's about continuing, flowing forward, even when the past still echoes, even when the scars still itch. Even when there are no witnesses but the trees and the sky. And in that stillness, you know your life isn't something you escaped into. It's something you chose, something you've become. That's the difference. That's the ending. You are no longer defined by what you survived. You're defined by what you've grown, by who you've loved, by the quiet you've made peace with. You are no longer what the world tried to make you. You're finally quietly simply yourself. And that is enough.